Hello, everybody. Welcome to my live. Of course, I go by ESTEY'S Crime Maze on YouTube. Can everybody hear me properly? I hope the answer is yes. Thank you for joining me, everyone. I've got hopefully a rather epic, not so much as a presentation. Eventually, we'll make presentations on YouTube, and it'll be on, again, it's the IDAHO4 case, everyone. But today, I'm going to try to give you, it'll still be somewhat of a presentation, but it'll be information from some of my thoughts, many of my thoughts, and I've got some stuff I could read off for you today, everyone, because we're going to go over a lot of information. And feel free to leave me a comment, everyone, and or question. I'll be happy to answer them, because this case, as many of us already know, it's wild, it's crazy. The twists and turns, the lies, right? The misinformation, disinformation in this case. And when you really look at it, my friends, and many of us know, it is a massive, massive cover-up. Yes, it is. But one of the things that many don't understand and don't realize, and I didn't realize for the longest time until really recently I put it together is, and some other people have done the same, my friends, where we realize these, again, this would be my opinion, but the facts back it up when you look at it, everyone. The real case, as part of the cover-up, is that the students, and here's the good news, my friends, you know, we keep being told that all four students back in November 13th, 2022, right? We keep being told over and over and over again from the cops, from the FBI, right? From corporate media, CIA curated corporate narrative media, right? We keep being told that there was a stabbing. It was a quadruple homicide. All four victims, unfortunately. Kaylee Gonzalez, this beautiful, vivacious, intelligent university student, right? They were living just off campus at 1122 King Road, November 13th, in the hours, you know, everybody's been trying to figure it out between what? 3, 4 in the morning or so, that Kaylee Gonzalez, we're supposed to believe, was stabbed, unalived, as YouTube likes to say, right? We're supposed to believe her best friend, and they were like sisters, right? Steve G. Kaylee Gonzalez's father, and Kaylee's mother attests and tells you, and all the friends will tell you, Madison Moog and Kaylee Gonzalez, they basically had unconditional love for one another. A great story there. They were like sisters, right? But we're supposed to believe that also Madison Mogan was stabbed to DEATH, unalive, right? And then we're supposed to believe that somehow an assailant, more than one, also unalived Xander Canoodle. Again, another beautiful, intelligent, vivacious woman, student. And she was 20 years old, right? And of course, Ethan Chapman. Ethan Chapman, by the way, 6'3" or 6'4", big strapping guy, right? We're supposed to believe that he got taken out as well. But the real reality, my friends, the good news is I truly believe, and others people are starting to realize this, they are alive. Yes. And I'm going to connect the dots for you, everyone. We're going to talk about the WITSIC program. And I want to give credit to Birdie on TikTok and YouTube for this, everyone. He looked into this. The WITSIC program, it stands for, the letters are W-I-T, I don't want to get it wrong, E-C. And eventually we'll do presentations, everyone. I'll show you the letters on the screen. The WITSIC program is a real program in the United States by the feds, and the acronym stands for Witness Protection Program, or you could say stands for Federal Witness Protection Program. This is a real program put in place, everybody, where literally the feds will do a covert extraction operation. So, for example, if and this is legal, everyone, if a witness, particularly a compromised informant, if their cover is blown, literally the feds can do an extraction operation and will at times. And here's what really brought it home for me, everyone. And anybody, all of you guys and gals can look this up, okay? I'm still waiting for people to hop on my live. I can't believe I don't see anybody on my chat. I don't know if the chat page isn't set right or what. Anyway, I'll go on here, everyone. This is so important. Did you know the feds, if a witness, a valuable asset, confidential informant, if their cover is blown, they can literally, legally set up a violent event scenario. Yes, my friends, they could set up an event. So that could mean just one person where, you know, just like, let's say a cartels are after this one individual. They can, you know, you've seen it before where they'll pretend even that someone is buried, right? Or the cops might even do this, right? You take photos of somebody that supposedly is dead, but they're really not, to show, you know, somebody that they're dead. Anyway, I hope I'm explaining it somewhat right. But the bottom line is, everyone, they can create a violent event to protect a confidential informant. So what are we seeing in this quadruple homicide, everyone? I believe that it fits this case, everyone. This is a complete strategic operational psyop. Yes, it is. A huge cover-up, my friends. And again, the good news is, part of the cover-up is the feds don't want you to know that they actually protected these students. Again, everybody, even Jay Embry, who's doing fantastic work, who shows you that we all know that for whatever reason, these students were targeted. One or more of these students, let alone all four, obviously their lives were in danger. But the lie is, and Jay Embry doesn't seem to understand this yet, everyone, I don't think. The lie is that the students were not, I don't believe they were taken out. The feds, to their credit, they were surveilling these students all along, my friends. They knew that they had to extract them and extract them quickly. This was planned for quite some time. But as somebody reminded me, my friends, and those of us that know this case well, we've been trying to figure out, what did Maddie tell Adam? It was Maddie, I believe, right, everyone? Remember, as they're walking towards the grub truck, Kaylee asked Maddie, what did you tell Adam? And Maddie said, I told him everything. Everybody's been trying to figure out, what did Maddie tell Adam and what did Adam know? And that probably, I'm surmising here, everyone, that probably, again, the feds would have known that Maddie told, you know, Adam everything. And that would have just made sure that the feds knew that they had to extract them very quickly that night, November 13th. And again, what Jay Embry doesn't seem to realize, I don't think, everyone, because he's never looked at it from the lens that he knows that the students were targeted. We all know that, right? But again, we'll go on to Brian Koberger, the guy that they arrested shortly, everyone. But what Jay Embry and others don't look at is they don't look at the lens that, what if it was an extraction operation? I mean, Jay Embry's got to realize that the feds, they know all about these students. They would know all about a confidential informant inside the house of 1122 King Road. And most likely, at least one of them was working for the feds. I'm sure Jay Embry's thought about this, okay? And so again, what Jay Embry fails to look at, though, my friends, because he doesn't think, I don't think, about really an extraction operation. He may not even know what that is. He probably doesn't know what the WITSEC program is, or maybe he does. But Jay, I would address Jay Embry and all others out there that all that activity you saw out front of the house largely that night, just before or during the atrocities, those were feds. The cars, right? Someone pacing back and forth and on the cell phone, somebody sitting in a car for 4 hours, the dumpster guy. Many of those, if not all of that activity was the feds. They needed to extract those students that night, I believe, everyone. And here's the proof, in a way, everyone, that the house went dark. One of the big YouTubers, or a woman on YouTube, she showed you the house went completely dark, starting what, 3:30 in the morning or something, everyone. So they were probably staging that extraction then, okay? And again, I don't think Jay Embry, he doesn't, unfortunately, he fails to connect this, everyone. He still thinks that the students actually were unalived. But it's not, my friends. There's so many red flags to show you that really, reason, logic, common sense, they weren't unalived. And again, everyone, Jay Embry, he rightly so, he exposes the lies from corporate media. He exposes some of the lies from, elements of law enforcement there in Moscow, Idaho, working with the FBI and obviously CIA, especially through corporate media, right? But again, Jay Embry, my friends, he should understand too well, part of the lies is that it's a huge cover-up. The students actually got rescued by the feds. Let's give credit where credit's due. I talk about the lies from the feds and some of their disgusting behavior in elements of the FBI. We know the system is corrupt at times, and there are some good FBI agents, but let's give credit where credit is due. Those feds did everything they could. They knew those students' lives were in peril, I believe, my friends. And again, it all goes back to the cartels and or, elements of the Aryan family, the Aryan members, my friends. It all goes back to drugs and compromise. And Jay Embry's talked about informants, everyone. I just wish I could talk to Jay and say, Jay, why don't you look at the fact that these feds probably did an extraction operation, and thus, everyone, the students are relocated. Again, more good news, my friends. In the WITSEC program, when they've extracted one or more people, right, for being unalived, dead, killed, they will relocate them. And what have I been saying on my videos about relocation? I think I just happened to guess right. I kept saying I believe Kaylee Gonzalez and Madison Mogan, and possibly Ethan Chapman-Zana as well, they're in Puerto Rico, of all places, probably Puerto Rico. Why? Well, in the United States there, my friends, part of the Witness Protection Program, WITSEC, I want to make sure I'm pronouncing those letters correctly. Yeah, WITSEC. It operates in Puerto Rico, my friends. Yeah, they're probably living beautiful, they're going to live at least beautiful lifestyles here. And this is why, again, part of the reason why I believe more of the public, we should know the truth on this, everyone. Dig in. You got Steve G, Kaylee Gonzalez's father. If I'm right, and other people are right, this was an extraction operation, the students are alive. You got Steve G, who's probably a Fed himself. I mean, many people have said it. The guy looks like a Fed, right? He's acting like a Fed. He probably signed a non-disclosure so he could put out the narrative, that his daughter and the others were stabbed. All this horse shit. It's all lies, in my opinion, my friends. Steve G, he's receiving all these, hundreds of thousands of dollars? Many thousands of dollars from the public, hard-earned taxpayers' money. And even people who believe that, his daughter was unalive, many people say, well, I don't agree that Steve G should be making all this money on the back of his daughter's death, right? I think they make a good point. But wouldn't you guys and gals agree that it's even more disgusting and abhorrent that Steve G, if he knows his daughter's alive, which I believe he does, again, this was an extraction operation by the feds, I believe, my friends, that Steve G, he shouldn't be, all this money, where do you think it's going? If I'm correct and others, my friends, the money is going towards his daughter's beautiful lifestyle and some of the other students, the family members. That's the real reality, I believe, everyone. Steve G is lying to you. He's lying to you, in my opinion, my friend. He's been caught in numerous lies, I believe. But so we got to be careful. Just, again, everyone, if you understand how the intelligence agencies work and the deep state, and I study these guys and gals, I really do. I don't know all the answers, obviously, but I study UFOs. I study the black budget technology, the military-industrial complex, CIA. I study some of these covert programs. I might have a defense contractor friend or more. You never know, my friends. But really, when you research and study this stuff, you start to understand how they operate. And I'll give you an example, my friends. Let's go to the arrested, the person, Brian Koberger, right, everyone? Everybody's been trying to figure out, first of all, how did they get to Brian Koberger? Well, we know part of the convenient narrative. They claim, law enforcement, I believe some of the dirty cops over there in Moscow, Idaho, controlled by, the FBI, CIA, the university establishment, in some ways is in on this as well, I believe. But they claim that they found touch DNA of Brian Koberger ultimately on a knife sheath, right, on a button snap, no less. And the knife sheath was just happened to be found at, under Madison Mogan's leg or beside her leg. I don't want to get morbid because we're supposed to believe that Madison is unalived, one of the 4 students unalived, right? So then they did all this IgG, DNA, right? They sent it to Authorin Labs. And somehow they traced it eventually back to Brian Kohlberger's father, right? And then we're supposed to believe, but they got on to Brian Kohlberger on, what was it, December 16th or something like that. So, I mean, it just goes on, the nonsense, everyone. And then if you're on to Brian Kohlberger by December 16th, let's say, right? Why on earth would you hire a cleaning company, a contracting cleaning company, and clean up the crime scene before you even get Brian Kohlberger's lawyers involved? I mean, it makes no sense, everyone. And I mean, we could go talk for hours and hours. Very few people have mentioned this, I don't think, but why would you track Brian Kohlberger, follow him for hundreds and hundreds of miles, right? Many hours, having to stop him twice, because we all know, most of us know it's not a coincidence that he got stopped twice by the cops for apparently following too closely. No, it's all part of the Psyop, my friends, okay? But why would you follow Brian Kohlberger if you suspect that he possibly committed a quadruple homicide, was involved in any way? Why would you follow him all the way to his parents' house in Pennsylvania? Why would you not instead ask Brian Kohlberger to come to the police station like they normally do, right? And you don't have to say, "Oh, Brian, we suspect you of a quadruple homicide. Can you come into the cop station so we can ask you some questions?" No, the cops would be more delicate, right? They could make up an excuse. They probably would and say, "Brian, we have a few questions for you." They might even lie and say it's about something different. When you come to the police station, Brian probably would if he was just this, completely innocent man not working for the cops. But my friends, I'm telling you, I truly believe this was all part of the strategic and ultimately operational Psyop. Brian Kohlberger, he is a Fed, my friends. He's working for the feds. He was groomed by the feds, FBI, CIA. This is what they do often, my friends. They will pick a person, and we all have certain flaws in our personality. We know that Brian Kohlberger apparently was a heroin addict. I think there's no question about that. He's been on drugs in the past. Well, guess what, my friends? Law enforcement, they'll use people like that. I even saw it during COVID, my friends, in our grassroots movement that we were trying to build. We literally had government agents that at times would be fed drugs. These are like chaos agents. And then when somebody like, let's say a Brian Kohlberger, but it never happened yet, but let's say Brian Kohlberger, if he started speaking out and he got all unstable and stuff, then the deep state would bring him back in and they would control him. He'd be quiet. You would not hear from him for a while. But this is how it works, everybody. But the bottom line, they'll pick somebody like a Brian Kohlberger who's already on drugs. They can control him better, right? And he was used, I believe, almost like a crisis actor. I mean, we saw it, everyone. We're seeing it now, right? He's used for distraction, to distract you from the real reality that, yes, all 4 students that supposedly were unalived, they were targeted. I truly believe that. Most people realize this, right, everyone? Or everybody realizes, even people that think that they were unalived, obviously means they were targeted, right? But they weren't targeted by some one assailant, Brian Kohlberger. No, it goes back to the cartels, my friends, drugs, right? This is reason, logic, common sense, but so many people, they get sidetracked, right? They buy into this emotional psyop, this emotionally charged CIA, corporate media curated narrative, because that's all it is, my friends. And that means brainwashing and mind control, disinformation, distraction, to make you think that somehow Brian Kohlberger is the only assassin, that he did this atrocity. And again, my friends, as I say in all my videos, we all know the prosecution even had to admit this in so many words. And obviously corporate media, they know this too, my friends. They had to admit that Brian Kohlberger has no motive. And he has no identifiable connection to the family members, the victims, nor the residents, and really even the community. The guy's from out of state. He went to Washington State University, my friends. These are huge red flags, isn't it, everyone? Right? So there you go, my friends. I mean, on Brian Kohlberger. I mean, and we could go on and on about even more about Bryan Kohberger. And if you have any questions, please, everyone, feel free to ask me them, even when this live is done, because obviously, unfortunately, my chat page is not open, and I don't know why, but I appreciate you listening to me so far. Those of you that have, yeah, I don't get it. I'm going to have to figure out this whole YouTube live thing, my friends, but I'm still excited to be here with you. Yeah, so Bryan Kohberger, those of you that believe he's innocent, you're right, he is innocent. But just know that he is part of the plan, I believe. He's an actor, my friends, yes. He's been hired to be a crisis actor. And we know he's very intelligent. So he's very capable of playing this role, everyone, right? And again, here's the thing, my friends. Once you study the deep state, you understand that they'll use somebody like Bryan Kohberger, who has this position, a high sort of profile position in terms of academics, right? He's taking this PhD in criminology. That's part of a perfect cover story, my friends, right? Because then they know that even guilters, if some atrocity, if some fake atrocity was sort of staged, like this quadruple homicide, then they know that the guilters, they could put through corporate media, oh, well, Bryan Kohberger, he must have been a one-off Ted Bundy serial killer type, right? I mean, and the only thing that though Bryan Kohberger had in common with Ted Bundy, when you look at it, right, everyone, is that they both took PhD or were going for their PhD in criminology. That's about it, okay? So, but my friends, again, the deep state will use somebody like Bryan Kohberger in his position to carry off a very covert, and in this case, I believe, an extraction operation, a complete psyop. And yes, they'll even go so far as to arrest Bryan Kohberger. You know, for a long time, I used to think, oh, Bryan Kohberger, I think he's working for the feds. And then I thought, like a lot of people, I thought, well, how could he be working for the feds if he's been in jail all this time, right? That's very unusual. And would somebody actually do that, knowing they're going to be in jail for a long time, wait to go to trial? But the answer is, everyone, yes, it's possible. Think about it, everyone. And it kind of makes sense. Again, Bryan Kohberger, trust me, everyone, he has connections, direct, intimate connections, I believe, with the feds. And it's very easy to really think this, I believe, everyone, because we know, and again, law enforcement, in other words, because Bryan Kohberger, we all know through his history, he wanted to become a cop, right? He tried to go into law enforcement. That's a perfect cover story, everyone. I'm telling you, right? Then he would have been interviewed by the intelligence communities within law enforcement, FBI, for example, everyone. He could have easily been groomed, right? And they know he's got autism, right? And they probably would have said, Bryan, here's the deal. You're going to be the hero ultimately. We just need you to do this for us. You're going to go to jail now. We're going to stop you on the highway twice, right? We're ultimately maybe going to go to your house in Pennsylvania. We'll knock the doors down. It's all to pretend that you're this lone wolf assassin, right? Quadruple homicide killer. Somehow you did this atrocity. But obviously Bryan would know a lot of what they wanted to accomplish with him. And he would have had to most likely agree to this. And again, maybe it has to do with Bryan Kohberger's autism, everyone, who knows? But Bryan, for whatever reason, he's agreed to do this. He's playing a role, and obviously he's famous. But again, everyone, the bottom line is he didn't actually do this atrocity, and there wasn't even an atrocity that was committed. This is the great news. This is why people who condemn me for my theories on this, they should look at the fact that this is good news that I'm telling you, everyone. The students they weren't unalived. They're actually alive. I want to keep saying that, my friends, because it's true, I believe. And if you doubt me, think about this, everyone, and other people have talked about it. Again, I think this lends credence to my theory that it's correct that the feds extracted these students. They've protected them. They're now relocated. Because look, did we have an open casket funeral for any of the students? No, they were all cremated. And then you had some misinformation bullshit that, you had to have one person that was supposedly buried and had a private funeral. And that was Ethan Chapman, I believe, right, everyone? But again, everybody, there was no open casket ceremony for any of the students. And for any extraction operation in which, you know, somebody where the feds have actually, you know, say rescued them and extracted them from a potential, you know, unaliving, you will never ever have an open casket funeral. That is a fact. That's a fact. And whether you believe these students were really unalived or not, I wish more people would just stay open-minded. Look through the lens, because you might change your mind. Look at the fact that you'll never have an open casket ceremony. And not only that, my friends, here's what also I think leads credence to my theory, my point of view that these are still alive. That, as Birdie has said and other YouTubers, there has not been one crime scene photo leaked to us, the public, you know, through corporate media, etc. Not one crime scene photo taken and leaked to corporate media. Those are huge red flags, everyone. That should tell you something, right? I mean, come on. A corporate media, whether it be News Nation, which is largely CIA, this, you know, new news station, right? They call it news station. Whether it be News Nation, CBC, Dateline, they all have the money, we know, and connections that almost every single time in high-profile cases, we know that we almost always see, you know, at least one crime scene photo, if not numerous ones. You know, again, I don't want to come off to sound too morbid, but again, everybody, not one crime scene photo yet leaked in the IDAHO4, and you will never have an authentic crime scene photo leaked of the students, for example. Nor did we ever see them, you know, in body bags and all this stuff, even though they could have staged that as well if they wanted to do that. But so again, and here's the other thing. A woman reminded me of this, my friends. Remember, there was an interview, and Kaylee Gonzalez's mother, by the way, just another red flag, she admitted and said that her daughter, Kaylee, the day before the atrocity, her daughter, Kaylee, basically photobombed her mom. She gave her mom all her photos, if not most of them. And I had a woman on social media who reminded me of this. She went on to say, I have two daughters that are about the same age as Kaylee Gonzalez and Madison Mogan, and never have my daughters photobombed me. Think about that one, everyone. So my point is, isn't it very well possible, if this was an extraction operation, Kaylee Gonzalez, Madison Mogan, they knew beforehand, you know, especially Kaylee, she was getting debriefed in some way by the feds probably, right? And therefore she was giving photos to her mother. This is not just a coincidence, I believe, everyone. It could be, but I doubt it's just a coincidence. And then, my friends, you go back to that very night, like I said, and yes, I believe, wasn't it Madison Mogan that Kaylee said, what did you tell Adam? And Madison said, I told him everything. So the feds, they probably knew that transpired. They were, again, they were around those girls that night at some point, I'm sure. They eventually, within the first hour or so, they probably already knew it, and they knew they got to get them out of there. And here's the other thing, my friends. Jay Embry pointed this out, and many others. Bubbly Waters. This kind of makes it complicating, but we do know there was a known gangbanger out front of the house that night, my friends. The night of supposedly this unaliving. There was a known gangbanger, Farley, probably a very dangerous individual, part of the Aryan family. And one of Xana's neighbors, you can hear them clearly shout out, I see you, Farley, I see you. So the feds, I'm sure they were in those neighborhoods. They were probably living in those neighborhoods, right? And or informants, etc. They probably heard that being shouted out. And again, it goes to point towards that the feds, they knew that these students were about to be unalived, and they had to extract them and do it very quietly, do it very quickly, and they did. I'm convinced of it, everyone. At least Kaylee Gonzalez and Madison Mogan for sure were extracted, I believe. But hopefully, I would think Xana and Ethan Chapman also got extracted as well. Okay, everyone? And also, my friends, please don't buy into even the red blood, so-called blood on the foundation of the house. Again, I don't want to sound too morbid, but the red on the foundation of the house, many of us are supposed to believe, of course, that, you know, you're supposed to believe logically that is part of the unaliving, right? That there was all this blood at the crime scene. But again, my friends, if I'm correct and others, if this was a psyop, again, all a huge cover-up and staging, then it's very easy for law enforcement, right, elements of them, to put, it could be pig's blood for all we know, to just, or paint, to put that, because again, that's part of the visual, everyone. You got to have some sort of so-called visual evidence for the public to buy into. And why do I say all this, my friend? Why was law enforcement so hell-bent on staging this violent scene, I believe, that happened? As I told you, everyone, because, and again, they had to do everything they can, they're trying to convince a cartel group, whether it be the Aryan family or Sinaloa cartel, whoever, they're trying to convince them, some of these evildoers, that there's been an unaliving, that these students were in fact taken out. Not only were they targeted, they were taken out. They've got to convince them, right? Because, well, the cartels, were targeting them, or the Aryan family, but they got to convince them, law enforcement, the feds, my friends, they got to convince them, therefore, that we have unalived them. So what better way? You put a little bit of, at 3 in the morning when it's dark, you're going to put a little bit of red on the foundation of the house. And I believe, again, that's part of the psyop. And I wish Jay Embry would think like that, everyone. But, he's done a lot of great work regardless. So I wanted to put this live out and discuss this in a big way, everyone, because now I believe this is one of the most important times of the hearings. And then we know the trial's coming up. Now, they just had a live case go on alternative perps, right? The defense now is bringing up alternative perps to the judge, right? And obviously the prosecution had their say in it, last week or so. They're demanding that the defense, and the judge is trying to demand that they have to show proof. Obviously, the prosecution didn't even want them to have to be able to bring up any alternative perp theories. But here's the thing again, everyone. When it comes to the actual unaliving itself, there is no perpetrators that actually did the crime. Yes, there are people that targeted these students, but in terms of real perpetrators, there isn't. These students are alive, I believe, everyone. And again, the touch DNA of a Brian Koberger, that's all nonsense. That was all planted, in my opinion, my friends. And a lot of people know it. Again, reason, logic, common sense, everyone. So it's I almost have to laugh when all these YouTubers are trying to do, many of them have real authentic intentions. They're trying to dig into the truth on this case, but they follow the psyop. They get caught in it, everyone. They're thinking that there's actually perpetrators. They actually got to the victims that night. No, they didn't. The feds, to their credit, again, my friends, they protected these students, I believe. They quietly and quickly extracted them. Obviously, it wasn't easy, I'm sure, for the feds. But they're trained to do this, my friends. That's a fact. And even, by the way, everyone, this huge operation that was out front that night, with several individuals, again, I believe mostly feds, to extract those students. Jay Embry shows you, my friends, he was the first one to show you there is an unmistakable sound, right, of a gun slider being cocked. No question about it. Somebody cocked a gun. Now, Jay Embry thinks it was one of the assailants. But I would argue, everyone, and I think I'm right, that was a Fed. That was a federal agent cocking his gun. Think about it, everyone. If this was really an unaliving stabbing, why would the assailant why would he even bother cocking his gun if he's going to use a knife? I mean, he might, but I doubt it. Or she, right? So I believe it was a Fed. Again, another thing that points to the extraction operation being a correct theory, everyone, and a real reality, is that, remember, what did Dylan Mortensen say that she heard? One of the things she heard, she literally heard somebody go in and say, I'm here to help you. I'm here to help you. Do you, again, reason, logic, common sense, everyone, do you really think a Brian Koberger or any assailant or assailants that were responsible supposedly for a real unaliving, do you really think that they would go in the house and say, I'm here to help you? I mean, and play those kind of mind games in the midst of all this chaos in the house trying to unalive people? No, of course not. But you know what it points to, my friends? This is why I get so excited. It points towards the extraction theory, my friends, that the feds went in there And of course, they got to have their guns cocked just in case, you know, for protection, etc. Right? This is all standard operating procedure. They went into that house, and as part of the standard operating procedure, my friends, they literally told however many students were in the house, they said, "I'm here to help you." Because not all 4 students necessarily knew what was going to happen, possibly, right? Kaylee Gonzalez, I think, knew what was going to happen, Madison Mogan, but not necessarily Zana and Ethan, let's say, right, everyone? So there you go, everyone. Again, everything I told you today, everyone, those of you that have subscribed that Brian Kohlberger is the lone assassin and all this, you know, all that, I hope that you could digest what I've said to you, my friends. I hope you can look through the lens and do your own research, but listen to what I've said, my friends. Please go to, just Google WITSEC program, W-I-T-E-C, I believe. WITSEC, Witness Protection. Again, the acronym stands for Witness Security Program. Look for yourself and just Google. You can also Google, I mean, the rabbit hole goes deep here. As part of the WITSEC program, you can Google private drivers. And guess what? It describes, my friends, if a valuable asset, you know, a compromised witness has been, you know, again, compromised, again, in danger, for example, then yes, they'll hire private drivers. And it'll be like a government often issued vehicle. They'll even say U.S. Marshals. Okay? This, again, reason, logic, common sense. If you're going to try to protect a witness and you're extracting this witness and you're trying to relocate them, etc., they're going to have a private driver. And in extreme cases, again, with cartels, government, they're going to have armed drivers, right? And that very well may have happened again with the students, and I believe did, everyone. The drivers were probably armed to the teeth. And here's the other thing that points towards the extraction operation theory and the students alive. Here's what points towards that it's true, everyone. Because everybody's been trying to figure out too, well, if Brian Kohlberger or whoever did this atrocity, if they're really unalive, why would Dylan Mortensen and Bethany Funk, the other 2 in the house, why would they be alive? Why were they untouched? Does it make any sense? And we know the 911 call, again, everyone, it was probably contrived, right? Many people have said that when they listen to the 911 call. And again, the biggest thing is, everybody's been trying to figure out why was the 911 delayed for 8 hours? For anyone to delay a 911 call for 8 hours, that's abhorrent behavior, isn't it, everyone? And then, you know, you get in the court docs and through law enforcement and the defense and prosecution, we're supposed to believe, well, Dylan claims that she was, you know, she was so strung out. She had all these drinks in her, all this alcohol, right? So her judgment was impaired, and her and Bethany, that's part of the reason why they didn't call 911. It's all lies, my friends. It doesn't even make any sense, hardly at all. No, what makes more sense, my friends, and I hope you guys and gals agree with me, but again, feel free to leave me a comment, even if you disagree, but I hope you'll tell me why you disagree. The 911 call was delayed, most likely because the feds told Dylan, they just told her, don't, and they told Bethany, don't call 911. We're here to help you. We're going to extract these students. We're going to protect them. Do not call 911 for 8 hours. And that could have been a very direct, spur of the moment sort of, you know, just that night when the feds went into the house, you know, under the cover of darkness, very quietly, covertly, they could have easily told Dylan Bethany that. And then again, the feds are armed. They know, you know, you don't mess with us. We're here to protect the students. Do not call 911 for 8 hours. It's that simple. That's what happened, I believe, my friends. Okay. We can't, obviously we can't know all the intimate intricacy details of what went on with that night, but I think that's part of it, everyone. So again, my friends, this, and again, finally, everyone, we know through many people, and when you look at this case hardcore and you look at all the drug gangs operating, you look at the drug bust going on, and you talk to ex-FBI agents, for example, they'll tell you, everyone, again, there was at least 2 to 3 parallel investigations going on, all during this time frame, my friends, and even after the atrocity, right? These are huge federal investigations, as well as you got huge cartel and gang, operations going on, selling drugs. And we know the dorm rooms, were stored. When you look at this case and other cases, often they use the dorm rooms, unfortunately, for storing drugs at times, right? For distributing drugs, product. I'll say rugs on YouTube, right? So, and we know in the university infrastructures themselves, they've got literally cartel members at times, right? And informants, selling drugs. You got the FBI, again, in these university infrastructures at times as well. They're trying to, flip people to be informants, to go after big fish in the cartels. So it's one huge incestuous pool. And this goes on in so many small towns all across America, apparently, everyone, right? This is a real reality. But all these people that just want to focus on Brian Kohlberger as the possible assailant, right? I think they're doing a disservice largely to the public, because none of these guilters, as far as I know, they don't even educate the public at all on what was going on and what happens in small town America. All this drug running, and thus, a lot of young people unnecessarily are being, as we know, succumbing to drugs. They're being addicted to drugs. They have all this product in front of them at times. This is a real reality, my friends. All this trafficking. And then you got sex trafficking. I mean, anyway, I think more people should bring awareness to this, all these drug hubs. And yeah, the federal investigators, they could still do their thing. I don't hold it against the feds that they were doing parallel investigations. Not at all. But again, my friends, I get frustrated because we, the public, we shouldn't allow ourselves anymore to be hoodwinked or lied to by the feds. I guess it's up to us to figure this out, bring awareness, and spread the truth, at least in my opinion. And I know many of you feel the same way, because you guys and gals are after the truth, right? And you want to spread the truth around. And I think, again, the truth, my friends, is the students. The good news is they're alive. The feds protected them. Oh, and before I end this live, my friends, just like in many videos, I think it's so important. And other people have started to say this word, but they don't really define it. This whole operation, again, this is what the cops, law enforcement, FBI, the intelligence agencies, particularly CIA, operations within the military-industrial complex. This is what they are trained to do, my friends, especially with investigations. They will conduct psyops. Now, first of all, as I alluded to earlier, my friends, I said two different types of psyops, but there's actually three different psyops. So here we go. You've got operational psyops, you've got tactical psyops, and you have strategic psyops. I describe, my friends, this whole IDAHO4 case largely, these covert investigations, it was a tactical operational psyop. And these are really, you could say, describe it in a way as unacknowledged special access programs going on within the FBI, CIA, particularly with this IDAHO4 case and some of the, going after the cartel members. In other words, it was extremely compartmentalized. It's very covert, my friends, okay? Including the extraction operation, I believe, okay? So please don't forget that. Now, and please don't forget this part, my friends. Here is the definition going on about actual definition of a psyop. It's any activity that, and think about the IDAHO4 case, my friends. Think about the curated narrative with Brian Kohlberger, right? And charging the public's emotions, right? To think, oh no, it's got to be Brian Kohlberger. Anybody who brings up an extraction operation theory that the students are alive, for example, they must be out of their minds. Jason must be out of his mind, for example. ESTEY'S crime maze. No. Here's what a psyop is, my friends. Again, it's any activity that is practiced mainly by psychological methods with the aim of elucidating or evoking a planned psychological reaction in another person. And I by the way, I defined all this in my speeches really during COVID when I was a public speaker. Another way of saying it is when you take selected information and indicators to an audience to affect, and you could do this to individuals and or groups, by the way, my friends, to affect their emotions, their value systems at times, belief systems, and objective reasoning. That's what a psyop is, my friends. And by the way, a psyop is a very important part, of the US and really Canada here and other countries. Is a very important part of their economic and, you could say they're very important part of their economic and military activities. Because again, my friends, military do psyops all the time, right? And again, a psyop is a very important, they'll often use psyops for confessions. Right? Again, you're trying to influence, right or wrong, you're trying to influence the person that you're interrogating, for example. Often you're trying to influence their behavior or their attitudes even at times, or their emotions, right? To try to get to the truth, information, etc. So that's largely what a psyop is, everyone. And again, the IDAHO4 case, my friends, it's a huge strategic operational psyop. I just described to you these drug investigations that we know that was going on, the drug bust. And by the way, my friends, remember, there was a huge drug bust just before IDAHO4 case. And then there was a massive drug bust in Washington State, we know, where they busted, 26 members at least of very high ups within the cartels and or gangs. So again, everyone, that shows you there was at least 2 to 3 huge federal investigations going on. And some of these investigations, like I said, these you could say they're unacknowledged special access projects. That's how compartmentalized it is, everyone, how secret. And I know this because I study the aerospace companies, which is a whole other subject. Again, the black budget technology within the military industrial complex and largely CIA, okay? And again, I just might have a defense contractor friend. So I know how some of the secrecy works, my friends. Trust me. It is, and again, it's very, very covert. Any extraction operation done by the feds is obviously going to be very covert, very secret, done quietly. And that's what happened, I believe, at 1122 King Road on November 13th. And again, my friends, when you connect the dots, I think the circumstantial evidence is overwhelming that students are alive. I don't think the evidence points towards that they were stabbed or unalived. No, I just showed you, everyone. I just literally articulated. I didn't always do a great job in this video, everyone, but I tried to articulate to you a lot of the dots that shows you the circumstantial evidence. This most likely was an extraction operation done by the feds. And I showed you real history, my friends, that they do this. And I'm telling you, my friends, we'll do whole videos on this, that the IDAHO4 case, it's a very, very important case, possibly for the future of a lot of our families and children out there, my friends, future generations. And even now, because again, a lot of these huge cases at times, these high profile, almost international cases, just look at 9/11, everyone. We got to be careful because elements, particularly of the CIA, we know that at times throughout history, even in the last decade, right, they've tried to override our rights. They'll try to, for example, obtain information through investigations, even illegally, so that they can actually go through court proceedings and legally make it a law. They can try to override our rights at times and make it legal, my friends. Okay? And there's a legal term for that, and I forget what it is, but we got to be very careful here, my friends. Just look at how they try to get the DNA for Brian Kohlberger. This has been talked about. The FBI to this day, as far as I understand, they still not have shown their work at how they doubled the snip size, for example, of the DNA. Ann Taylor brought that up as a defense attorney, right, my friends? When the FBI got the DNA from Arthur Lambs, they doubled the snip size. And you can Google this, my friends. This means that if you double like a DNA snip size, that almost 100% shows you the DNA was manipulated, that the FBI are doing all kinds of insidious work. Okay? Again, everybody, Brian Kohlberger did not do this atrocity. If Brian Kohlberger had any DNA that was really discovered authentically by law enforcement, it's just planted, because I just showed you, in my opinions, everybody, Brian Kohlberger is he's part of this program working with the feds as almost like a crisis actor, right? You see it, my friends. Brian Kohlberger has served as a perfect distraction, all this distraction and noise on corporate media, so that we would get distracted and put all our energy into, oh my God, did Brian Kohlberger really do this atrocity? Did he or didn't he? And so you don't focus on the real reality. those students weren't even unalived. They were protected by the feds, and that's good news. Those are my opinions, but I think the facts really do back it up, everybody. And again, I believe, God willing, all 4 students, they will live, again, as part of this program. Once they get settled, they'll live low-profile lives largely. You're not going to see probably any digital trails on them, right? You're certainly not going to hear from them. We're not going to see them. And they'll be protected, and they will live out their lives. But again, I think Steve G is doing a disservice, in my opinion, to the public, everyone, because he's receiving hundreds of thousands of dollars from the public. I believe he's even asking for money as well, and he's getting it, and it's being used for his family. He's lying to you when he wants to convey that his daughter was killed. Those are my opinions, everybody. But again, evidence. Neither does one family member to show you that their family members were actually killed or unalived. There is no evidence to show you those 4 students were unalived. Okay? And again, there's no motive there's no motive, at least for Brian Kohlberger, but there was a motive for cartel members probably and gang members to try to unalive some of these students in that house. That was a real reality, unfortunately, my friends, and you better believe the feds knew that. Okay? And again, we'll talk on future videos of some of the informants in this case, everyone, through all the drug running. I mean, again, Jay Embry's done a great job, and others have talked about it. Karen Norlington, I think is her name. Xana's stepmom was most likely an informant, right? She made a lot of seemingly deals with law enforcement. If you look at the court docs, she was released early, and same with Xana's father, apparently. So most likely they were snitches, my friends. And it probably put some of those students in peril, in real danger, okay? And again, finally, I'll just say, everyone, by the way, did you know that it was at least all 3 girls, all 3 women in that house, and I've talked about this before, they had parents that had direct ties to or were involved in or went to prison for dealing hardcore drugs. And why do I bring that up? Because we know for a fact that is the highest risk for victims, everyone. If you don't think that's a coincidence, if you don't think that relates to the IDAHO4 case, if you don't think that relates to the feds, therefore monitoring the 4 students and trying to protect them, then I think you're naive, my friends. This goes back to the drugs, to in some way some of the parents, and their associations with the drug world. This is how it works, everyone. And yeah, I guess you could say it's still possible that, a gang or the cartels actually were able to do this atrocity, but I don't think so, my friends. I think the feds were onto it, and to their credit, I think they were able to extract those students. And I think the evidence sort of points to that. It really does. And again, look at no open casket ceremony, I think points to that. Even with the so-called autopsy, I think the coroner, that Karen Babbitt or whatever her name is, I think she's bought and paid for. I think she's probably corrupt at this point. Again, I don't even think she's going to testify at the trial. Those are all the other huge red flags, my friends. That's my prediction. I don't even think she's going to testify. Again, one autopsy photo has been leaked. It'd be very difficult for the feds to actually fake autopsy photos, even though it's probably possible. But they probably don't want to have to do that. They don't want to have to risk that. So we haven't seen one leaked autopsy photo. Again, I showed you, my friends, almost in every high-profile case, particularly cases like this of a quadruple homicide, you're going to have leaked crime scene photos, but not in this one, my friends. And the reason is, reason, logic, common sense, because those students are alive. No open casket ceremony. Why? Because the students are alive, my friends. Okay? And then we could go down a huge other list of other red flags in this case, showing that I believe the students are alive. And I alluded to some of them. Again, Kaylee Gonzalez, reminder everyone, as I said earlier, she photobombed her mom the day before the atrocity, so-called atrocity. The day before Kaylee and all the students, all 4 disappeared, she happened to give all her photos basically to her mother. You think that's a coincidence? Again, I had a woman on my social media left me a brilliant comment, and she described how she's got 2 daughters, the same age roughly of Kaylee Gonzalez and Madison Mogan. She said, my daughters have never photobombed me. And she went on to say she agrees that they were probably extracted. And I think it was a great comment by her. So there you go. It was an interesting perspective from a mother. Thank you so much for listening, everybody. I enjoyed this live, even though I didn't have my chat page set up somehow. I don't see anybody on the live that I can converse with or or read your comments. Last time I think I was able to, so that's strange. By the way, everyone, maybe you could leave me a comment. I don't know how YouTube Lives work very well. Please tell me, why was I unable to see any of you out on my chat page today? Very disappointing. I wanted to see your names. I was going to set up maybe a donation page, etc., because I had, on my last live, somebody was kind enough to ask me, how do we actually donate? And I could obviously use any money for some new equipment, but I'm not going to beg, but I really appreciated the consideration. Anyway, I've said enough here, everyone. I don't want to ramble. I could be reading off a lot more notes on the IDAHO4 case, but we'll do that hopefully on future lives. Thank you so much for listening. These are my opinions largely, but again, the facts back up a lot of this, what I'm saying, I believe, everyone. And I'm not here to slander anyone. I think Steve G, overall, he was a very, very good father towards Kaylee, it looked like. I think they had unconditional love, it looked like, as a father-daughter relationship from what we've heard, from the videos we've seen. So I give Steve G credit there. He seems like he's overall a good father with the daughter that is presently living, I believe, with him and the mother, and her mother, or Steve G's wife. But Steve G does have one daughter, apparently, I guess the second daughter, is it, that has no relationship. She doesn't want anything to do with her father, apparently. Now, I'm not going to go on about that because I don't know for sure. You know, I don't talk to Steve G or the wife or the daughters, but let's give credit where credit's due. I think Steve G was, he brought up Kaylee Gonzalez very well. I'm sure he's going to miss her dearly. He may be able to see her once in a blue moon or maybe never again. Whether or not he'll ever have any digital communication with her, I don't know. Again, just surmising that she is alive based on what I see in this case, everyone. But Steve G is lying to the public. That's why I say some negative stuff about Steve G, my friends. In my opinion, Steve G is lying. He's trying to hoodwink the public to convince you that his daughter is no longer with us. And I wouldn't even blame him, except that he's asking for money. He's asking for money, trying to convince you that he wants money for his daughter that is no longer with us. I mean, it's just crazy. Anyway. And yet she is alive, in my opinion. Anyway, and Steve G's been caught in other lies, I believe. But again, let's give credit where credit is due. He's going to dearly miss. If Kaylee's alive, and either way, if she was really unalived, or if she's alive and relocated, Steve G will probably never see his daughter again, or for a very long time. So I feel for him, and for the other parents in this case too. My heart goes out. And you know what, my friends, even though I believe all 4 students are alive, I still have sympathy for them. My heart goes out to them. I hope that if I'm correct and others are correct on this theory, I hope they will live productive, independent, and I'm sure they'll live low-profile lives. And I hope they enjoy the rest of their days, and I hope it goes well for them. And I thank the feds for protecting them. Again, giving credit where I think it's due. Elements of the elements of the FBI, CIA, law enforcement, even some of the local law enforcement there in Moscow, Idaho, that have been read into these, I describe unacknowledged special access projects within the IDAHO4, the ones that really know what's going on, that are read in. I believe that they did the right thing. They were able to protect all 4 students. So they never have to be angry at me. Thank you, everyone. I go by ESTEY'S Crime Maze. I forgot to remind and ask you guys and gals, if you enjoy my videos, I hope you subscribe to my channel, of course. I hope you smash that like button. Hit the bell icon. You can be notified for future videos. All this apparently helps with the algorithm to get the videos out. Same with leaving a comment, and I read your comments, by the way. That also helps get the videos out, and ultimately to you guys and gals. Okay? Again, especially if you think I have value to share with humanity, I hope you'll do all that, everyone, okay? And I appreciate your times. Let's take this channel a whole new level, everyone, by the way. Thank you for sharing your times with me again, my friends. And thank you for caring about humanity yourselves. Thank you for caring about truth, justice, because I know many of you do. Many of you want to get the truth out. Many of you want to know all the truth that we can to unveil what the hell's really going on in the IDAHO4 case. And we're starting to get a lot more truth, my friends. But don't buy into this emotional psyop. Don't buy in that there were really, literally perps that committed this atrocity. There were perpetrators in terms of, people that wanted to unalive those 4 students, unfortunately, I believe, but they never got to them. No way. Especially Kaylee and Madison. They were extracted. And I think Xana and Ethan most likely were extracted too by the feds. Thank you, everyone. Got to go. Have a great day or beautiful morning, evening, afternoon, wherever you are. This is ESTEY'S Crime Maze. Again, hope you subscribe. More videos to come on the Idaho 4. Take care, everyone. Bye. See ya.